Okay, let's jump straight into this explainer. We're traveling to a freezing, isolated Siberian fur farm to look at an absolute biological mystery. Today, we're unpacking one of the most fascinating mechanisms in all of biology. We are talking about the secret cellular engine that takes fierce wild predators and turns them into the affectionate pets currently sleeping on our living room rugs. It's a crazy story of accidental discovery, hidden genetics, and one single biological lever that literally changes everything at once.
So, picture two foxes. One is slamming against its cage bars, snarling, ready to tear your hand open. The other? It's whimpering, rolling over, and actively pushing its head into your palm just to be petted. Now, you might assume one was born wild and the other was raised as a pet, right? Nope. These two foxes were born a few cages apart on the exact same farm. Nobody trained the gentle ones, and nobody tamed them. Their grandparents were entirely wild animals that would have bolted from you. The only thing separating them is a groundbreaking 60-year experiment that completely rebuilt a wild predator into an animal biologically wired to love people.
To figure out how they did this, we have to rewind to 1959. This insanely ambitious experiment was started by a Soviet biologist named Dmitry Belyaev. And he had to do this quietly, and honestly pretty dangerously. At the time, Stalin's government had completely banned the study of genetics. They called it a Western lie. Scientists who studied genetics were fired, jailed, or worse. But Belyaev kept at it anyway. He was absolutely convinced that every domestic animal we have, whether it's a cow, a pig, or a dog, was created entirely by accident. He simply did not believe that early humans intentionally designed the dog.
Belyaev's theory was that the domestication was just the result of selecting for a single behavioral trait, over and over again, and letting the rest of the biology follow. To prove it, his team headed to these massive fur farms raising thousands of silver foxes, and they set up a strict, simple protocol. First, test how a fox reacts to a human reaching into its cage. Second, out of every 100 foxes, pick only the calmest dozen. Third, breed them. And fourth, and this is the absolutely crucial part, completely ignore all other physical traits. They didn't care about size or coat color, they only cared about one single thing: friendliness.
So, over the next few decades, Belyaev and his colleague Ludmila Trut ended up raising about 45,000 foxes, and they tracked some massive, undeniable chemical changes. For the first few generations, nothing much happened, but then by generation 6, these foxes were wagging their tails and licking hands. By generation 12, the tame foxes had exactly half the stress hormones in their blood compared to the wild ones. Their brains were just pumping out way more serotonin. And by generation 30, the natural fear response that normally switches on in fox pups was severely delayed. It left them open, calm, and trusting for way longer. Their entire body chemistry was basically rewriting itself.
But here is where things get wild, the ultimate plot twist of this explainer. Because while Belyaev was breeding strictly for calm behavior, the fox's actual physical bodies started changing in completely bizarre, totally unexpected ways. He absolutely was not selecting for a certain look, but an entirely new look was forcing its way to the surface anyway.
Generation after generation, these gentle foxes started developing incredibly specific features. Their traditionally stiff, pointed ears, they started to flop. Their perfectly straight tails curled up into loose little hooks. Random patches of white started spreading across their fur, usually starting as a little star right on their forehead. Their snouts got shorter, and their skulls literally rounded out. They were taking on the soft, open face of a puppy. Again, Belyaev selected for none of this. He just picked the friendly foxes. But somehow, floppy ears and spotted coats arrived in the package anyway.
So the big question is, why? Why do all these totally unrelated physical traits come magically bundled with friendliness? Like, how on earth does choosing a calm personality give an animal a curly tail and a white patch of fur? Well, the answer to that mystery lies in the very first days of life, deep in the embryo, long before the fox is even born. It's all driven by a hidden biological mechanism that we can call the Neural Crest Engine.
It all comes down to one highly specialized batch of cells called the neural crest. Early in an embryo's development, these cells don't just sit still, they fan out. Think of them like a construction crew migrating through the entire body of the growing embryo to build a very specific, but seemingly random, list of biological systems.
You can actually see this biological engine at work when you look at the anatomy. Neural crest cells are responsible for building the adrenal glands. Those are the exact glands that pump out stress hormones and trigger fear. But as they migrate, those exact same cells also dictate how stiff the ear cartilage is going to be. They deliver the pigment that gives the fur its color. They even help form the bone structure that shapes the animal's snout. It all comes from that exact same embryonic source.
And boom, now we can see the hidden mechanics of domestication. By breeding only the calmest foxes year after year, Belyaev was basically demanding animals with underactive adrenal glands. To get that, he was accidentally selecting for animals that naturally produced fewer neural crest cells overall. But because he was shrinking this single batch of cells just to dial down the fear, there literally weren't enough of those cells left to finish their other jobs. Less fear meant less pigment, which gave them white patches of fur. It meant weaker cartilage, which meant floppy ears. He was pulling one single biological lever, but it moved a dozen physical traits all at once.
This is the perfect illustration of what scientists now call Domestication Syndrome. It all boils down to a brilliantly simple truth. Fear and cuteness are wired to the exact same dial. You literally cannot turn down an animal's fear without fundamentally altering those neural crest cells, which automatically turns up these cute, floppy-eared, soft-faced physical traits. It's a total physiological package deal. You select for friendships, and the animal physically redesigns itself.
Now let's bring this all the way home and connect it to the animal currently sleeping on your floor, because every weird, fascinating thing we just saw in those Siberian foxes, it is sitting right there in your dog. While Belyaev triggered this syndrome in foxes on purpose over 60 years, the exact same biological process happened to wolves entirely on its own.
We've always loved telling the story of domestication with humans cast as the ultimate masters. You know, the idea that our brave ancestors went out, captured ferocious wild wolves, and masterfully tamed them. But Belyaev's foxes prove it just doesn't work that way. It took over 15,000 years, but humans never actually captured and tamed the first dog.
Instead, the whole process was completely self-guided. It was self-domestication. Wolves that were born with slightly smaller neural crest capacities, meaning they were just a little less afraid by nature, crept closer to our ancestors' camps. Because they were brave enough to get close, they got to eat our leftover food. Because they ate better, they survived longer and successfully bred. Over thousands of years, the friendliest wolves essentially bred the fear right out of themselves. Nobody was watching, nobody was directing it, but they transformed into dogs exactly the same way those foxes did.
And this deep, cellular self-domestication process fundamentally altered their chemistry in ways that directly hijacked human biology. Seriously, think about this. When you and your dog make eye contact, both of your brains release a massive hit of oxytocin. That is the exact same chemical hormone loop that floods a parent holding a newborn baby. Your dog is literally reaching into the chemistry your body reserves for your own children and switching it on. They even evolved a specialized eyebrow muscle, one that wolves completely lack, just to lift their inner brow into that irresistible pleading look that immediately triggers our human caregiving instincts.
This total devotion goes all the way down into the deepest levels of their genes. It turns out the friendliest dogs carry distinct changes in the exact same stretch of DNA that, when it's missing in humans, causes a condition called Williams syndrome. Now, people with Williams syndrome tend to be exceptionally trusting on sight. They love almost completely without fear. Your dog's bottomless devotion and affection are literally written into the canine version of that very same genetic code. It is an incredible, ancient biological inheritance. And we know exactly how ancient and powerful this bond really is. Just look at the incredible archaeological evidence from the Oberkassel grave in Germany. We're talking 14,000 years ago, way before farming or written language. Ancient humans painstakingly hand-fed a dying puppy that was sick with distemper. They kept it warm, nursing an animal that was far too sick to ever offer them anything useful in return. And when it finally died, they carried that puppy into the grave and were buried with it, pressed right against their bodies.
So tonight, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to look at your dog and ask yourself a question. The floppy ears, those soft puppy eyes, the helpless total devotion, all of it grew out of one ancient cellular act of selecting against fear, driven entirely by the neural crest. It was built to love you by forces it never even knew existed. But if its devotion is just a biological side effect of losing fear, does that make the love any less real? Or does it just make it infinitely older and far stranger than you ever thought? Thanks for joining me to explore this incredible science. Keep seeking out the hidden wonders of our world, and I'll catch you in the next